Think about this for a second. 80 million hectares of degraded land in Central Asia. That is an area you could not walk across in an entire lifetime. Every year, 100 million tons of poison salt rises from the dried-up Aral Sea and drifts all the way to the glaciers of the Pamirs. In that same span of time, the region has lost 90% of its forests. And then comes the news. South Korea is going to teach Central Asia how to hold back deserts and bring forests back to life. South Korea? A country with a humid climate, mountains, and meadows? A country that does not have a single meter of desert? On the surface, it seems like a strange fit, but that is exactly where things get interesting.
Central Asia is 5 countries, vast distances, and wildly different terrain. Mountains to the east, steppes in the center, deserts to the south and west. Kazakhstan alone is larger than all of Western Europe. And yet, for all that variety, the region shares one defining problem. Deserts are advancing and swallowing up productive land. Deserts move slowly and steadily. Salinization, erosion, overgrazing, Soviet-era irrigation projects that pulled water from rivers without a second thought about the consequences. According to the United Nations, more than 20% of Central Asia's total territory has already degraded. That is 80 million hectares of land that can no longer feed people, hold roots, or retain moisture the way it once did. Forests are a whole separate story. Here, in the mountain valleys of the Tian Shan and the Pamirs, wild apple trees, walnuts, and pistachios once grew. Not plantations, but genuine wild forests. This region, by the way, is where every cultivated apple variety grown in orchards around the world originally came from. Over the past 50 years, 90% of those forests have disappeared. What is left in their place is, at best, scattered shrubs. At worst, a bare slope carved up by rain and wind. And wind in Central Asia is a conversation all its own. Dust storms have always been part of life here. But since the Aral Sea started disappearing, they have become something else entirely. The Aral dried up so completely that a new desert formed on its exposed floor, the Aralkum. 60,000 square kilometers of bare salt and sand sitting where water used to lap at the shore. Every year, that salt lifts into the air and scatters across the entire region. According to researchers, over 30 years, the dust load in Central Asia's atmosphere has grown by 10%, just because of the Aral. The first time I came across the figure of 100 million tons of salt per year, I did not immediately grasp the scale. This is not road dust. This is dust that shows up on Pamir glaciers 1,000 kilometers away from the Aral. Dust that speeds up the melting of those glaciers. And the Pamir glaciers are the water source for rivers that feed hundreds of millions of people. But what does any of this have to do with forests? Salt from the Aral? Glaciers in the Pamirs? What do trees have to do with any of it? The truth is that the only thing capable of slowing dust like this down is shelter belts. Long, wide, living walls of trees. But who is going to plant them in the middle of a desert? And how? And it is exactly into this region, with its bare slopes and salt-laced air, that South Korea arrived a few years ago. Not with money and not with speeches, but with an organization it had built itself. It is called AFOCO, the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization. 17 member states, 3 of them right here in Central Asia. But the real question is not why, it is who. Why Korea specifically? This is not a coincidence and not a political gesture. There is a very specific story behind it, and it is worth telling. Because without it, there is no way to understand where Korea gets the standing to teach anyone about planting forests. In 1953, right after the Korean War ended, The country was in ruins, cities destroyed, no industry to speak of, and mountains that were completely bare. Not as a figure of speech, literally bare. Timber stock per hectare was 6 cubic meters. For comparison, a healthy forest typically yields 150 and up. Korean mountains looked like the surface of the moon.
There were several reasons for this. The Japanese occupation, during which forests were cleared to fuel industry. Then the war, which burned through whatever was left. And after that, simply poverty. People went up into the mountains for firewood because there was nothing else to heat their homes with. Korean winters are cold, and there were no other options.
The government launched a reforestation program in the late 60s. At first, it meant mandatory planting. Then came the Semaul Undong movement, the effort to build a modern, comfortable, and functional society, which picked up the idea and turned it into a nationwide campaign. Arbor Day, the day for planting trees, became a national holiday. School children, soldiers, government officials, everyone went out to plant. The message was simple: let us make our homeland green with our own hands. And it worked. The United Nations recognized Korea as the only country in the world to have fully restored its forests through artificial planting after World War II, in 40 years. Today, 65% of Korea's land area is covered in forest. Those same bare mountains I mentioned are now living, green forests. And here is the important part. Koreans did not just plant trees and walk away. They built an entire system: satellite forest monitoring, genetic seed banks, early wildfire warning systems, climate modeling. What started as survival became a technology. And now they are bringing that technology to Central Asia. But before we get into what exactly the Koreans are doing there right now, it helps to understand what they actually ran into when they arrived. Because what they encountered was not visible on any map. Kazakhstan was the first place the Koreans showed up with something concrete to offer. And the reason was impossible to argue with. June 2023, Abai region, the Seme-Ormani Pine Forest Reserve. The fire burned for several days, and when it was finally put out, 90,000 hectares of pine forest had become scorched earth. 15 forest workers died. 90,000 hectares means pines that had been growing for 50 years and longer. Trees that had been alive longer than most people live. Gone in a matter of days. The Minister of Emergency Situations was fired in the middle of the fire, while it was still burning. Korean specialists arrived on site that same fall. No cameras, no press releases. They measured the soil, looked at the nurseries, assessed what could realistically be restored and over what kind of timeline. A year and a half later, they signed a memorandum. Joint restoration of the burned areas, Korean fire monitoring systems, training for Kazakhstani forest rangers. The monitoring piece is worth singling out because it is not just a buzzword. Kazakhstan has satellites. It has geographic information systems. But in 2023, environmental experts were saying outright, all of that exists, but it does not work the way it should. The people who went to fight that fire were carrying radios with dying batteries. Then there is Tajikistan, a different story entirely. No fires like that, but a different problem. There is almost nothing to plant with. To restore forests, you need seedlings. To grow seedlings, you need seeds. To store seeds, you need infrastructure. And that infrastructure does not exist there. The Koreans built a nursery with a seed storage facility. It sounds modest, but it is exactly the foundation without which everything else falls apart. And not just any seeds, local ones. Collected here, from trees that have already survived this climate, this elevation, this drought. A tree grown from an imported seedling and a tree grown from a local seed are different trees in terms of survival.
The Koreans know this not from textbooks. They learned it firsthand. Then there is an unexpected project in Kyrgyzstan. There, the organization is working together with a Dutch bank, and the setup goes like this. A farmer plants trees on their own land. In return, they receive carbon credits. Those credits are sold to companies that need to offset their emissions. The money comes back to the farmer. The first time I read this, honestly, it did not click right away. I read it again. Here is the core of it. The tree starts generating income immediately, not 20 years from now when it can be cut down, but right now. For a mountain farmer in Kyrgyzstan, this flips the entire logic around. Before, a tree on your field meant spending time and land. Now it means a source of income. Alongside all of these projects, the Koreans are building a shared technical platform. Satellite monitoring, real-time weather data sharing between countries, and a platform where anyone can donate toward planting a specific tree and then follow what happens to it. Starting in May 2026, they launched joint live test sites where countries try out methods directly in the field and immediately share results with one another. 3 countries, 3 different problems, 3 different tools. Fires, seeds, money. Korea did not show up with one ready-made solution. They look at what hurts and apply a tailored approach. But all of this is still targeted work. Important, functional, but targeted. And then in April 2026, something happened that took the whole effort to a completely different level. On the 22nd of April 2026, the presidents of all 5 Central Asian states gathered in Astana. The leaders of Armenia, Georgia, and Mongolia joined them. The summit was called the Regional Environmental Summit, and it produced a resolution called the Green Shield of Central Asia. The resolution calls for building a unified regional system of protective forest belts running across all 5 countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. Living walls of trees designed to stop the advance of the desert, slow down dust storms, and stabilize the soil. A Korean organization was named as one of the key implementing partners. A big announcement at the leadership level is not exactly breaking news in Central Asia. A lot of declarations have been signed here. Some of them never made it off the page. I specifically went looking for skeptical takes on the summit, and they exist. The diplomat wrote directly in the lead-up to the event, expectations should be modest, because good intentions and photo opportunities are not enough. But there is one thing that sets this story apart from a typical declaration. Shortly before the summit, also in 2026, AFOCO received accreditation from the Green Climate Fund. That is, the United Nations body through which major international money flows into climate projects. Without that accreditation, the organization could only count on contributions from its member states. With it, the door opens to a completely different scale of funding. That changes everything. There is a big difference between a country planting trees on whatever is available in the national budget and a project backed by an international climate fund with resources in the billions. The scale is simply not the same. And here is one more fact I did not expect to find. From 2013 through 2024, AFOCO completed 65 projects with a combined budget of $231 million. These are not future plans. This is already done. The organization has existed for less than 10 years, and it already has a long track record of completed work behind it. The Green Shield is an attempt to move from targeted projects to a system. Not one nursery in Tajikistan, and not one burned forest in Kazakhstan, but a continuous belt of living trees running through the entire region, functioning as a single organism. Stopping dust where it lifts into the air, holding moisture where there is not enough of it.
Whether it will work is a fair question. But the fact that 5 presidents signed on at the same time, and that the organization responsible for delivery has real experience and now access to serious funding, this is already more than words on paper. So what does all of this actually mean for real people? Not for countries, not for organizations, but for people. Start with Kazakhstan. Seme-Ormani, the burned reserve, is not just a patch of green on a map. People who live around it built their lives around that forest. Being a forest ranger there was something passed down from father to son. The 15 people who died in that fire are not abstract casualty figures in a report. They are specific families in specific towns. Kazakhstani forest rangers are now being brought to Almaty for training. People who spent their whole careers working with whatever tools were available are seeing for the first time how the Korean early fire detection system actually works. How one person sitting in front of a screen can keep watch over thousands of hectares. This is not some abstract technology exchange. These are real people who go home with a fundamentally different understanding of their own job. In Kyrgyzstan, the story is different. A mountain farmer there is someone with very little money and very limited options. The land is there, the work ethic is there, but the path forward is not clear. The carbon credit setup gives that farmer a tool that simply did not exist before. Plant the trees, earn income, without selling off livestock or sinking into debt. It is worth understanding this in context. In a region where young people are leaving for cities in large numbers because there is no money in the countryside, any working financial model tied to the land is already a meaningful development. Trees here might hold more than just soil. They might hold people, too. What is striking is that almost nobody is writing about any of this. I looked specifically. There is one short segment from a Kazakhstani television channel about the project in Abay region. That is it. Every other source is Korean media, the official AFOCO website, materials in English. Korea simply works quietly. No big announcements, no political rhetoric. They came, looked, proposed, signed, and started doing the work. Stories like this do not travel well in a news cycle that runs on scandals and conflict. And yet behind that quiet, something important is taking shape. Korea is not investing money directly into the region. It is investing expertise. The nursery in Tajikistan will be running on its own in 10 years, without any Koreans involved. The Kazakhstani rangers trained today will be training the next generation themselves. That is a fundamentally different logic of assistance. Looking at all of this together, a picture emerges that does not fit neatly into the usual frameworks of international cooperation. There is no major donor waving a flag, no humanitarian fanfare, no press conferences with handshakes in front of cameras. There is just the country quietly doing what it is better at than most. And in that quiet, that is actually where the central question lives. Not about trees and not about the desert. Korea walked this road itself. Bare mountains, cold winters, people going out to cut the last trees down just to keep from freezing. Over 40 years, they turned that around. But the desert operates differently. The Aral Sea took 50 years to dry up. The land across Central Asia degraded over the same kind of time frame, not in a single season. It happened slowly, a little more each year, until it turned out that 80 million hectares were already beyond saving. Now entire countries are trying to stop that process and push it into reverse. Seedlings, shelter belts, monitoring systems, funding, agreements. All of it is in place, and all of it is being done. But a pine tree planted today in a Abay region will not be fully grown for 40 years. The Koreans know this better than anyone.
because they waited that same amount of time themselves. The only real question is whether the next generation will have the patience to keep going with what the current one started. The desert, unlike people, is in absolutely no hurry.